All right, the first thing that we're going to do today is go over chapters 6 and 7, but quickly before we do that, since a couple of you had talked to me and said that you're still kind of struggling in here, if you're struggling, you might want to listen to this. If you're doing okay, then you won't have to worry about it. But what I've done is I've started creating some new videos. All right, I went in today and redid videos for chapters 1, 2, and 3. The one for chapter 1 is only like 6 minutes long. But for 2 and 3, I went back in and just to show you what I created, just a simple payroll program. I kind of told you that I was going to do this, but I created both a console program and a Windows Forms application. And I went through everything I was doing and really tried to explain. I put tons of comments in here. And so the one for chapter 2, there is absolutely no error validation in here. But if I put in this, it does all that. I mean, that should be pretty obvious, okay? And for the other one that's in here, the Windows Forms one, again, no error validation, but I put in a lot of code in here for it. So let me bring that one up. Looks like this. Here's the code. Again, I commented everything I could think of in here. And you run it, looks like this. Okay, but I've gone over and explained everything that I could think of in chapters 1, 2, and 3 that we may not have covered. All right, plus I've taken all this code, I put it into a Github repository, so if you want it, I'm going to keep adding to it. I'm going to do 4 and 5 on Monday, then 6 and 7 on Tuesday, etc. But if you go out here, I'll leave that up for a second if you're interested. So if you go out to my GitHub, I made it public. So if you go out to github.com/jpscottrankin/AWD1100-payroll.git, if you go out to that, all right, it should bring you here. And there it is. So there's the chapter 2 one, there's the chapter 3 one. So it'll come out and show you this. If you click on code and you click the download zip, you'll have the code, if that's something that you might be interested in. Again, there's the address. So you should be able to just go to github.com/jpscottrankin/AWD1100-payroll.git. All right, I have created, like I said, 3 videos so far. They'll be out on my channel. What I'm going to do is once I get them put out there today, they're all produced. I just have to stick them out on YouTube. I'll do that today. And I realize with some of you, you could probably care less. But I'm going to just send a mass email to the class, and it'll have links to all of those. All right, so that'll be out there by the end of the day. Okay? All right, so with that said, let's jump into chapter 6. So we're going to go over 6 and 7 today. 6 is on how to code methods and event handlers. 7 is on how to handle exceptions and validate data. All right. So let's go in and just take a look at what's in here. So chapter 6, we're already up to page 163 in the book. We're making good progress, I think. And it says so far, basically all of the code that we've been adding, we've been putting in the click event of our buttons. And that's not considered a proper way to code. There's 2 reasons for this. One is one I've mentioned to you already, that, for example, if we end up adding menus, so we can either call routines from menus or from buttons, then our menu would have to call our button click. And that's just really kind of awkward to put in code like that. So that's one reason. The other reason is it's just not considered proper to actually put your code in the control methods themselves. Those control methods themselves, like a click method, those should be mini drivers. In other words, they should call routines from their particular method that do the work. And that's what we'll talk about doing today. All right. So it says figure 6.1 shows you how to code a method. Guess what? You've been coding methods. There's nothing new in here. The only thing is we've been using built-in methods. All right. So let's create something just real simple. All right, so I'm going to get rid, well, I'll leave this one up here because I may go back to that later. But I'm going to start up a new session of Visual Studio 2019. All right, I'm going to come in and create a new project. It will be a Windows Forms project. And I'm just going to call it Calculator. Hopefully I don't have one that's called Calculator already, but if I do, I do. In fact, I'll call this one Calculator GUI with methods. And I'm going to just put it into a solution that's just called Calculator. All right, so create. This is, like I said, this will be very simple, but we'll take it, we'll make it, and then we'll rip it apart. What do I mean? Well, I'm going to try to show you that right now. I'm not going to worry about putting a title in here and stuff like I would normally do, but I will stick a few labels in here. So I'm going to have a label here. I am going to take the auto size, make this a little bit bigger. Okay, and the code in here, or the verbiage in here will just be number 1. All right, that's fine. You might have already guessed, this will be number 2. And I'll change the name on that to label number 2. All right, put in a couple text boxes. So this will be text box number 1. Sorry, I probably should have done this before class, but just came to me right now for doing it this way. And this will be text box number 2 then. All right, and we'll put in a bunch of buttons. I'm going to put in the first one here. This is not going to look very professional. I don't care. But I want this one will say just to have a plus sign on it. So this will be button add with just a plus sign. All right. That'll be subtract, that'll be multiply, that'll be divide, and that will be modulo. All right. And we'll also put in, I won't need 3. Delete that one. We'll put in a clear button, and we'll put in an exit button. Okay, so let me just quickly finish kind of playing with this. Oh, I don't know what I did there. I don't want that. No, that's fine. Put that here. This will be button subtract with a minus sign. Button multiply with a times sign. Button divide. And button modulo. And I forgot one thing, and then we can start writing code. And that is, I'm going to move these down. Come in here. This will say answer. And that'll be the answer. All right, so this will be label answer. And it should say answer. And this will be text box answer. Now, I strongly believe that any one of you who are in here could literally create what I just did in probably not much more time, maybe less time than I just did it. All right, so I'm taking for granted that everything that's in there right now, you all understand. And I hope that's a decent thing to assume. All right. Now, I'm not going to worry right now. I'm going to worry more about getting this to work. You understand? And I'm not going to worry so much about, oh, I got to verify that it's a number and I got to do this. No, I'm not going to worry about that right now. Okay? But what I am going to do is I'm going to start putting in code. Now, normally in the past, we've all done stuff like this. Okay, we've come in here. There's our add. Well, what do we care about? Well, we'll make this a double. And we'll say double number 1 equals 0 and double number 2 equals 0. All right. So what we want to do regardless, I mean, I'm going to show you a crummy way to write this. Do you understand what I'm saying? I'm going to show you right now a crummy way to write this. So I could come in here and say number 1 equals convert dot to double text box number 1 dot text. And then I could copy that and put number 2 in here. And then I could say, let's see, we'll put in another variable here that's called result. And I could say result equals number 1 plus number 2. Okay, then finally, I can say text box answer, I think we said it was, dot text equals result dot toString, and we'll make it to 2 decimal places. And hopefully you agree with me, that would work. That would not be a problem. Okay, so I can delete that and that, get rid of some of these extra lines. All right, and then I could come down and find the next one, and I could copy all this code down and just change that to a minus sign. Now, hopefully you agree. I'm not going to do the rest right now, but hopefully you agree I could do that for all 5. The problem is, notice in here how much code I'm repeating. And there's really no reason for doing that. All right? So let's talk about, at least to start with, I'm going to just come over here and I'm going to double click on each one of these just so that I've got them opened. And we'll even do our exit in our clear. Okay. One thing I want to mention, I'm going to purposely do something wrong here. Please look on the screen, because some of you did this on your code. Maybe you weren't watching when I did it, or you didn't think it was a big thing, but I'm going to come in here and I'm going to double click on here. I don't want that in there. Right now, that's code I don't need. Do you understand? I'm not going to put anything in there for form load. I want to get rid of that. But again, don't just remove it, because it's put into that formdesigner.cs file. And if you remove it from here, it doesn't remove it from there. So if you want to get rid of this, when I don't want form load, you come back into your properties window, click on the form, and then click on the lightning bolt right here. And what you'll find is there it says form load. See this? Now, if I just highlight that and hit delete or backspace or whatever, now when I go in here, now that's gone. See that? It's gone now. I will expect you to do that. I don't want there to be unnecessary code in there. There's no reason to do that. All right? So I've got all this code. The first thing I want to do is, geez, I'm doing the same thing here and the same thing here. So I'm going to write a routine to do that. And I'm just going to say, I don't know, private void set variables. Maybe that's a dumb name, but it's what I'm going to call it. All right. and I'm going to put that code in here. So now that code is in here once. It's in here once. So I can just come up here and I can call set variables here, and I can call set variables here. All right. In fact, I can fill in the rest too. So this is multiply. Whoops. I made a mistake there and there. So this is multiply. This will be divide. Whoopsie. Try it again. That is divide. And finally, that will be modulo. So what I'm doing here is I'm replacing, it's not that big of a difference, but notice it's 2 lines that I'm replacing with 1 all over. Does that make sense? All right. But I'm taking some of the code that would normally have been in the click routine, and I'm pulling it out of there. All right. So I'm going to come in here, and I'm going to do this. All right. Let's see. Well, this result, I could put that in its own routine. Now, again, you might say, well, that's kind of stupid. Well, maybe it is. But I'm going to say here, private void. I'll call it add2. And I'll pass into that. Nope, those variables were global, so I don't have to pass anything in. And I'll just say here, how about if I come in here? I don't even need to really do the result. I can do it like this. That's fine. So I'll do add2. And I really should have put it down there, but that's fine. So I'm going to say here, result, we call it result or answer. Result equals number 1 plus number 2. All right, so let me grab this add routine that I just did. And I'm going to put it right underneath my add button. All right, now I can call it, come in here and I can call add2. All right, now I'm going to write one more routine where I'm going to put in this. And I'm going to call that routine from every one of my, basically every one of my buttons. So private void show answer. And I'm going to put that in there. Now, I come in here and I got my add2, and now I can call show answer. All right. So do you understand what I've done here? I have taken the click routine, and instead of putting my code in there, I am calling other routines that are doing the work. So I can come back in here and I can copy my add2, and I can call this one down here subtract2, and I can put that there, a multiply2, a divide2, and a modulo 2. Does that all make sense? All right, I'm not going to do it right now, but just so you see that, okay? And I should be able to come in here now, and at least the add should work. All right. And it does. All right. Again, this isn't anything where you're supposed to go, oh, wow. I don't mean that, but I'm just trying to show you how we modularize what we're working with. All right. And in much the same way now, when we come in here, in our clear routine, we really shouldn't be writing the code in there. All right. So again, I'm going to call clear all, which I haven't written yet. So I'm going to get an error. And private void clear all. And what am I doing in here? Text box number 1.text equals that. Text box number 2.text equals that. And text box number 1.focus. That's that, right? And then in the same way, I should be able to come down here And in my exit routine, I should be able to call like exit program. I don't know, something like that. And then come down here and write a private void exit program. All right, now I'd have to come down here, and I did this before, so let's see if I still have it up somewhere. Nope. I'm going to grab that code. It's the same stuff I sent you. Okay, so now, as I come in here, the plus works, the clear works. Well, I didn't clear them all. And the exit works. All right, I'm not worrying about tab order or anything right now because we've talked about that already. I'll go back and change this eventually. All right, but what you see now is I don't have any code, any executable code starting here in my buttons. And now I have to go fix these still, but you get the idea. All right, so the idea is every single thing that we've added, this, all these that are built in, they're all what are referred to as methods. Some languages call them functions. The difference between a function and a method is when you are working with what's called an object-oriented programming language, like C#, they're called methods. They're just functions that are inside of what's called a class. We get into that in Chapter 12, so if that makes no sense to you, don't worry about it. It's totally fine. All right. During the break, I'll come in and try to fix the other ones. Now, all of it should actually work, though. So I should be able to come in here and do plus, minus, multiply, divide, modulo. Oh, I guess for modulo, I didn't change the sign. Clear, and exit. So it all works. But we're making it, it's not even so much that it works better. There are some people that would argue and say, you know, you made your code worse because you now have more code than you would have had otherwise. All right. But in a truly modularized program, let's say that I was asking you for 10 pieces of information. So I asked you for your first name, your middle initial, your last name, your address, your city, your state, your zip, all right, your social security number, your cell phone, and your home phone if you have one. 10 pieces like that. If I'm writing a truly modularized program, I'm writing that as 10 different methods. That way, if there's a problem with anything, I know right where that code is. If I write it as one method, now I got to go through the whole thing. Now, in something like that, that's not a big savings. But again, you know, when we talked the other day about that tax program, what if it was a problem? And what if in our tax program, what if we wrote everything inside of our calculate button? And we had thousands of lines in there. All right. So what if we did that? And now we've got an error. Now we've got to dig through thousands of lines. But if we have it modularized, it's going to make it easier when we're debugging it. Also, it's going to make it easier if other people end up maintaining our code later for them to understand what's going on. All right, so kind of keep that in mind. I just wanted to bring that up to show you as we get started in here. So here is a method, as it says, with no parameters. So you don't pass anything in. Here is a method with parameters. Now, if you look at what we just did, I set it up with making all three of our variables global. Where is it? I got the wrong one up. By making number 1, number 2, and result global, I didn't have to pass anything. All right. But you may or may not have noticed this, that all these buttons have a thing that says object sender and event args e. Sender is basically who or what did this. And in a way, it's you. You're the one who clicked the button. So typically, you don't do anything with sender. Event args, do you do something with? It depends. If you're writing a game and you have to have different coordinates, as you know, where somebody's moving around on the screen or whatever, you might, for example, do some work with the mouse. Then those event arguments would be important because they would have your X coordinate position and your Y coordinate position. Typically, I mean, virtually 100% of the time when you're working with stuff like buttons, Those are there. They're just necessary evils. All right, but we don't do anything with them. So a method can take in as many parameters as you want it to take in, 0 or more. If you want to allow, now we don't have other classes in here, so classes won't make sense till chapter 12. But if we had other classes and you wanted those other classes to be able to use our methods, instead of making them public or private like we did, we'd make them public. Right now, everything that we're doing that we put in here for methods, they're all private. So they can only be used by calculator. They can't be used by anything or anyone else. All right. What is in here, just so you know, because you're going to hear this term again, what is in here, the name of the method plus its parameter list. So the name of the method plus its list of parameters, that's referred to as the method signature. It's its name and the information you have to pass into it in order for it to be able to do its job. All right. So how do you call methods? Well, I just showed you that. It's the name of the method. They use the word this, which doesn't hurt anything, but it's implied if you leave it off. If you say, well, then I should put it on there, then put it on there. It's not going to hurt anything. But again, if you leave it off, it's implied. This is the first time I've ever seen it shown like this, was in the Muroc books. Now, when you start to call a method, the IntelliSense should kick in rather. So again, if I go back to here and notice, I'm going to remove this show answer and I'm going to type in show. And if as soon as I put in an A, boom, there's show answer. So it sees that there's a method with that name. And I'm responsible then for putting in the parentheses and the semicolon on the end. All right. Okay, now they're going to talk in here about passing arguments and passing them by position. Okay, now imagine for a second, look on the screen if you would. Let's suppose that I didn't make number 1 and number 2. Let's suppose I did not make them global. So let's suppose that I define them someplace else and I have to pass them into set variables, etc. Are you with me? Okay, now let's suppose that when I pass them in, I mean to pass them in number 1 and number 2, okay? But I accidentally flipped the order, okay? So instead of saying number 1, number 2, I'm saying number 2, number 1, okay? When I do the plus, it's not going to matter because 3 plus 4 is the same as 4 plus 3. When I do the subtract, it's going to matter. When I do the multiply, it's not going to matter. When I do the divide, it's going to matter. When I do the modulo, it's going to matter. So you want to make sure that the order in which you pass parameters into the method is the order in which you declare them in the method as well. All right, as long as you do that, you'll have a lot less to worry about. That's why some people choose to make the names in here the same names as the ones they use to pass them in. And if that helps you, by all means, do that. All right, there's also something called optional parameters. This is where it might get a little bit confusing. Let's take a look at the example that's right here. This example, this whole thing here. Notice it's got here, decimal monthly investment, decimal monthly interest rate equals 0.5, int months equal 12. Everybody see what I'm talking about up here? All right. Notice the second 2 parameters that are put in there. The author just put them on a new line so you could read it so it didn't scroll off the page. They have values. What that means is I've got my choice in here right now. When I call this method, I can pass in 3 different parameters. All right, so I would pass in, let's say I passed in a monthly investment of 1,000. And let's say I passed in a monthly interest rate of 0.1 for 10%. And let's say I passed in a month of 24. So I pass them in like that. Does that make sense? Or I could pass them in as 2 parameters. So again, I could pass in 1,000, all right, and I could pass in 0.1. If I just pass that in, this would default to 12. So it's as though I put a 12 in there, even though I didn't. Or I could pass it as just 1 parameter, just the 1,000. Then it would default to 5%, and it would default to 12. Do you understand the difference? So again, let's suppose I'm writing a program for Rankin Technical College and I'm getting student information. I might very well come in and do something like state. I might default it because 99 or 90 some percent of the people who come here are from Missouri. There are people from Illinois that come here, and there's people from Illinois more on the St. Louis side. But you get what I'm saying, hopefully. All right? So that might be something that I want to do. If you put in, unless they've changed it, and I don't believe they have, if you put in default parameters like this, they must be after your non-default parameters. So anything, you have to pass in at least one thing here, because this doesn't have an optional value. So again, you can call this and pass in either one thing, two things, or three things. That's what I tried showing you on here. All right? And sometimes this can save you a lot of headache, especially, because sometimes you write a method, and especially with people who, the example that I gave you before, the passing in 10 things, most people don't write that as 10 different methods. They write it as one method and they pass in 10 things. Even though that's not really the right way to do it, they do it that way anyway. All right. So the more things that I can make optional, the better off I probably am. All right. So I think I kind of explained everything that was in there. Take a look at it. If you don't understand something, just let me know. Now, next they talk about refactoring. It says in Chapter 3, you were introduced to refactoring, which is the process of revising and restructuring existing code. Guess what? I was refactoring when I was doing that stuff for you. That was literally going through and doing some refactoring. All right? So it says to refactor code, you can select the code you want to create a method for, press Control plus a period, and choose Extract Method from the Quick Actions menu. So you can go through and have the system try to do it for you. So if you look at that example that's right there, they're saying, you know what? That would have been better off in its own method. So they highlight it, and they do the key combination that they mentioned, and then it's going to go and throw it into its own method if you want to do that. Now, there's absolutely nothing wrong with what they just mentioned. But if you develop good programming habits from the get-go and you adhere to those good programming habits, you don't have to worry about refactoring typically. Or the amount of refactoring that you might have to do would be minimal. And again, that's why I tried showing you writing it like this as opposed to writing it, like we did in here. All right. The other thing too is, if you highlight something and you tell it to refactor, at least somewhat, you're giving control to the machine. All right. And I don't like that. I talked about these terms before, but I want to say them again. Explicit versus implicit. When something is done explicitly, you're doing it. When something is done implicitly, the software is doing it. All right. Now, some of you guys have heard this before, and you guys may not care, but you get to hear a little bit about my personal life just for a second. All right. I haven't done it now in 2 years because of COVID, but I karaoke. All right, I've got a friend of mine who lives out in Memphis. I go and try to visit him when I can, and we actually go down to the honky-tonks down there and whatever, and we karaoke. All right. The reason I'm telling you that, though, is I like when I have a good song to karaoke when there's no background singing in whatsoever. None. Why? Because that's what screws it up. If I screw it up, that's fine. Then I'm screwing it up. But I've had people tell me before, you sounded okay, but man, that background just really sucked. All right. And what I'm saying is, I want to be in control. But if I've got a bad version of a song that I do, and it's got bad background or bad music or whatever, then it's the song that's in charge. I don't like that. All right, it's kind of the difference. And again, you guys may have heard this already. A friend of mine that I used to hang around with in high school, we worked at the same place. He played guitar. He was in a band and he played electric guitar, but he also would play acoustic every once in a while. And I asked him, what's the big difference between the two? And he said a couple times he played out at a place and he played out with his acoustic guitar. And if he broke a string, everybody knew it. But he said he also played out in the band and he broke a string on more than one occasion. He turned the amp up and he did a little fidgeting around and he changed. Well, he wanted to be in charge. He liked it better when he was actually playing the acoustic. That's how I am. All right. So I'm saying if you develop good habits to begin with, the amount of work you have to do with stuff like this should be minimal, and ideally none. All right, pass by reference and pass by value. This is new. You have not seen this before. Did you hear me? All right. So just to show you this, this isn't going to be regular code, but I want to show you something in here. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say this. I'm going to say int x equal 3, int y equal 4, int z equals add 2 x, y. Then I'm going to come down here and write private void add 2, and I'm not going to call them x and y. I'm going to call them num1 and num2. And I'm going to say return num1 plus num2. Okay? All right. Now, anybody want to take a guess? What value will z have when we get done? It's not a trick. 7. That makes sense, doesn't it? But just so you know, when it calls it like this, what it does is it basically does this. Does that make sense? It basically puts the 3 and a 4, but it's a copy. It's a copy. All right? So why am I telling you that? So I'm going to go back and make this x and y again. Now I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say num1 equals 27, num2 equals 35. Now what value do you think z is going to have? 62. That's doing something you shouldn't do. But what we've done pretty much thus far is we have copied stuff in by what's called value. So you're making a copy of it. All right? So what if I do this? What if I don't want to do it like this? You know, what if I don't want to say int z equals this? All right? You know, are there other things that I can do? Well, what if I just want to come in here and say, let's see, I want to print the result. I don't know. But I can come in here and when I do this stuff, I can put in the word ref there. All right. So now if I come in and I say ref int num1, ref int num2, all right. Now guess what I've done? I have permanently changed the values of x and y up above. Because instead of passing it by value when I'm passing a copy, I'm passing it by what's called passing it by address. It's giving me the address of where this lives in memory. All right. And if you still are confused, look at it like this. All right. We'll look at two different things. So if I pass in here just x and y like this, all right, and if, like we said, now computers are zeros and ones, but I'm just going to stick the numbers in there. So if there was a 35 here and there was a 27 over here, and we asked for that, it's copying the 35, it's copying the 27, and it's adding the 62, and that's what it's returning. But if we do it by ref, and you've got the 35 and you've got the 27, let's say this is at address 1000, this is 1001, this is 3000, and this is 3001, just as an example. What it's passing in there is this and this when you pass it by ref. And if you're still confused, look at it this way. Let's pretend for a second, God forbid this happening, at least for the next few years while I'm still here, but there's a thing in the paper tomorrow that says Rankin has been sold, and they're going to put something else in here. Would you agree that if somebody comes in here tomorrow, and it's not Rankin Technical College anymore, it's whatever, all right? Let's just say Enterprise comes back and they buy the whole building, and now it says Enterprise Cars there. All right, would you agree, though, the address of this place is still going to be 751 Parr Road? The contents could change, but the address remains the same. That's why when you work with refs and you pass the address, all we're doing is we're removing the contents and we're replacing them with other contents. All right. So when you do stuff by value, it's temporary. When you pass by reference, it's permanent. That's the big thing to remember. Now, when you look in here, when you pass it, notice in here it says ref. And when you call it, I think we got to put ref in there as well. So I think we have to say here, ref. All right. You're going to see examples of this stuff as we go on. All right. But again, the point is the way that simple variables, almost virtually every variable we've talked about thus far has been simple. Strings, integers, doubles, etc. They're all simple numbers. All right. When you work with simple numbers and you pass them into routines by default, which means unless told otherwise, they're passed by value. So the contents, not the address, gets passed. Now what we're saying is if you want to make a permanent change to something, you can pass the address. All right. Hopefully that made at least some sense. Now, the other thing that's in here is they talk about this out parameter. What out means when you pass something as an out parameter. So let's do this. Let's go back to here. No, the example that I gave you there. And we're going to say this. I'm going to say here, not int z equals. In fact, I will do it like that. And I'm not going to change these. So I'm going to do x. I'm going to do y without a ref. And I'm going to say this. Out z. So now I'm going to come back in here and I'm going to have my num1 and I'm going to have my num2. All right. And I'm going to have in here out int result. All right. So I'm going to say here result equals num1 plus num2 return result. Now, the reason I'm showing it to you like this is what that word out up above here means is z does not have a value. The value of z is going to be created inside of this routine. And you notice that it is. In fact, if I left that out, if I just said if I left it like this, if I just said return num1 plus num2, I'd get an error. Because it would say you've got an out parameter in there called result that you're not setting. Now, we've done a little bit of this already. I showed you that out parameter in our validate is numeric, but that's how it works. Out means that it's being passed in, but it does not yet have a value. All right. But wherever you're passing it in, all right, it's got to be set in there. Now, I don't know if I'm making this easy to understand or hard to understand, but regardless, if this doesn't make sense, you've got to read the book. All right. I mean, if you're not reading the book, you're short-circuiting or short-changing yourselves. So they explain all that in here. Again, I give you my words. All right. Are theirs better? Probably. All right. Then it talks about how to work with events and delegates. Well, you already know how to work with events. If I double-click on this calculate button right here, assuming it's called button calculate, it's going to bring up a button calculate click event, correct? If I click on this one, and if it's called button exit, it's going to bring up a button exit click event. Those are events. You've already seen this, but before when I showed you this and we went over to here and I showed you how to remove that thing with a lightning bolt, let's just grab a button. We'll grab this exit button. All right, right now there's code in the click event. But if you look right here, if you look up on the screen, there's probably a good 20 or more events that I could put code into. I don't want to do that, but I could. All right. And I meant to do this before class. I forgot all about it. But if I go, for example, into the text box, you'll notice that one of the events that's in there, and I don't remember exactly even which one it is, but there's some kind of a change event in here. So what we could do right now, how have we been checking to make sure something is numeric? We've been running that validate is numeric, etc. We could set it up that we check the change event, and if you put in something other than a number, we just wouldn't allow it. It just literally, we wouldn't allow it to be put in. And if you go, I don't understand that. Well, I could come in here and try to find it this way. Text box, no, make it C# text box that allows numbers only. All right. And it's going to bring me out to this code world. I don't know even what that is. All right. But I like to go to Stack Overflow. Stack Overflow, if you've never heard about it, it's a site for developers. Be real leery, because I've done this. I've asked questions already, and I remember the first response I had. This is one of the dumbest questions that's ever been posted to Stack Overflow. All right. You should know this, and if you don't, you should be able to just Google it. Well, I did Google it. All right, but I guess I was Googling the wrong thing. But if you go out here, they'll typically say, how do you make a text box that accepts only numbers? And then under the answers, one of the answers, not necessarily the first one, but one of the answers will have a green check. And that's pretty much the accepted way of doing this. So they're showing that in here, and it's the key press event. All right, so this will only allow numbers. This will only allow a single decimal point. So you could put that in. But if it was a whole number, an int, you wouldn't even have to check for the decimal point. You just would have to check for numbers. All right, maybe a positive or a negative sign, something like that. All right. Now they talk about event wiring, and the bottom line is when you are writing code. So when I wrote all this code that I showed you before, all right, I'm going to go into a file I told you not to touch, but I just want to show you something. I'm not going to change anything that's in there, but I'm going to go into this form1designer.cs file. Everybody see this file right here? I'm going to go into here. And what's it doing? It's setting up, basically it's saying, okay, I've got a label that's called label number 1, one that's called label number 2, etc. So I've got some stuff in there, and it's setting that stuff up for me. And what else is in here? Then there's a form1.resx file. I don't remember offhand what that one does, but again, it's another one I shouldn't be monkeying with. So I'm going to come in here and look at what else is in here. Well, there's a program file. What's this doing? Okay, this says enable visual styles. Not sure what that's doing. Set compatible text rendering. This is it. This is telling it to run the program, that line that's right there. So there are a bunch of files that are in here that you shouldn't be touching, that the system is setting things up in here for you. And I was looking for one. I guess I wasn't finding it. Let's see, it's not, I don't think it's there. No, it's not there. But the point is, as you start writing more refined code, there are going to be files in here that are going to set stuff up for you that you just shouldn't be touching. So why am I telling you that? Because they start talking about that in here. And they even mention there's certain things that are generated and there's certain things that you can generate. So the author says here, when you use the form designer to generate an event handler, a statement is also created in the designer.cs file. That's what wires it up. All right. It creates what are called delegates. And hopefully you know what a delegate is, but let's, a couple times this happened last year. One time a month, we have people come in from Wentzville, business and industry, and they have a breakfast for them and a presentation. Not much of a breakfast. It's donuts, coffee, and orange juice. But then, a lot of times Don Pohl, who's the president of the college, or somebody else will talk about different things that are here. Well, a couple times it's happened that Mr. Corrigan couldn't make it on a certain day, so he asked me to go. And it wasn't that I'm all that great, but he needed somebody who was actually here. Some of his other instructors aren't here during the morning. So I was his delegate. Does that make sense? All right. Technically, if somebody had asked for a decision, I guess I was delegated the power to make it. That never happened. All right. But I was his delegate. In the same way, you can set up delegates in here. So it says a delegate is an object that represents a method. C# uses the event handler delegate. It wires up stuff. It's doing this stuff for you behind the scenes. So it's, for lack of better words, it's almost allowing you to act like a non-object oriented language by doing a bunch of the object oriented stuff for you behind the scenes. All right, I'm just going to leave it at that for now. All right. So the chapter ends, they give you another version of this future value application. Who cares? Well, notice now they're breaking it down into different routines. Very similar to the way I was just showing it to you with a calculator. All right. So as it says, it separates the calculation from the rest of the code. All right. And the text changed event, as it says, is wired to the clear future value event handler. In other words, it's cleared every time the user changes the data. So some of the stuff we've been doing by setting it equal to double quote, or whatever, you can do it even slicker than that and have things happen for you automatically. All right. So they show, as it says here, this is some of that generated code. Here's the event handlers and the delegates that are being set up for you that are shown here on, on this page. So that's it. All right. It is 9 o'clock. Let's take 15. And we're going to jump right into chapter 7 when we come back. And we'll talk about how to handle exceptions and how to validate data. Again, much of this stuff that's in here, we've already gone over. We should be done by 10 o'clock. All right. And